Hi, good morning, Jessica. Welcome back to the studio. How are you today?
So good. So good to be here.
Good. So I want to go straight into talking about the Solomon Learning Event. And we like to put on a free learning series each quarter for leaders and aspiring leaders in and around OKC, really for them to join important conversations. So why do we do this? Why do we put on the Solomon Learning Series?
I was just telling you before we started, filming, I had someone approach me last week at an event that was like, I'm so excited. I have my tickets for your learning event. And thank you. Thank you for doing this. And at least in her sphere, she said, I don't know anybody else that's offering opportunities to have these kinds of conversations for free. I mean, we're doing it for free. You have to get a ticket. It is limited seating and we're selling out every time. So I think even just those indicators, people are excited. They're anticipating, they're trying to stay and keep these events on the radar, mean that we're meeting a need. And I think that need is for leaders and other organizations to just share best practice and have conversations that are theory to practice. Mm-hmm. So we always have a theoretical framework that we're talking through, but we get down to action. And I think that that's really what seems to be missing at times in conversations. How do we get our ideas about what's healthy and what's good into our organizations to move the needle?
So they'll pull out actionable insights that they can take back and use. So if we're, as far as we know, the only company doing these things for free, why are we doing that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, there's the real pragmatic. We want people to be able to try our group on for free. One of our core values as a company is generosity. Mm-hmm. And so while it does cost us money and it costs us time to put on these events, we want to be generous to the community and model that. It's also integrity. I don't want to buy stuff I don't need, and I don't want to buy stuff I don't believe in. And so we want our prospects and our clients to have opportunity to engage in the way that we facilitate and decide, are we a match for them can we go ahead and give some show and tell to maybe our executives who might be skeptical about making this kind of investment? So I think it models our core values, but it also gives people a super low barrier to entry for figuring out if we're the right partner for them.
Awesome. So all of 2025, we focused on a specific conversation, the culture conversation. What gap were we trying to fill for leaders in organizations this year?
I think we were trying to drive some clarity in what does it mean to talk about culture. Culture can feel really squishy. People will talk about it as the soft stuff, the pizza parties, that sort of thing. And we just reject the idea that culture is squishy or that it's optional. Yeah. We have culture in our organizations by default or design, one of the two. And we don't get to opt out to a third way. Mm-hmm. It's either we're designing our culture on purpose or we're defaulting to what's happening in our organization without driving it intentionally.
Yeah, it's there. Whether you like it or not, is it by default or is it intentional? But yeah, I think that's really good. So when you think about culture, and I almost want to use like the bunny ears, like culture, because it's a little bit of a buzzword out there, but what do you think is the most misunderstood part of culture that really our series has tried to address?
I think it's that culture is only something that happens organically. I had this conversation with a gentleman last week who's super smart and a part of a really cool organization, but he was resistant to the idea of defining and designing culture on purpose. And so it was this core belief that that culture is only real if it's happening organically. Kind of the idea that love is only real at the beginning when it's all the butterflies versus, the love that happens through work and commitment and perseverance.
Yeah.
And so I think as an organization, that's what we're trying to drive clarity towards. Culture is actually pretty tangible. There are some real things that leaders can do on purpose and rather than on accident to drive healthy culture. And we're here to help drive some clarity into what are those things that leaders can do. How does trust even work? We know trust matters. How does trust work? How do leaders drive trust? What is culture to begin with? What are the major component parts of culture, which is what we're going to tackle at our next event next week or this week. This week we're having, so by the time this airs, people will have already attended. But, there are 4 major categories of culture. It's our directional definitions, where are we going and how do we talk about ourselves? It's our structure, our systems, processes, our organizational hierarchy. It's our narratives and rituals. How do we talk about ourselves? How do leaders talk? How do we celebrate or not the successes of the organization? What do we celebrate? What do we highlight? And then ultimately influences in the ecosystem. Some of that more DNA level stuff. Yeah. What are the unwritten rules? What are the things that influence culture? And so those are the major 4 pieces that we would say are creating culture. And so we talk about doing that intentionally rather than accidentally.
So I think you've mentioned a lot of components that make up culture, and that would be our Solomon culture framework. But explain quickly the difference between those components that you described as the culture framework and what I think leaders get confused with about culture, which is engagement and retention. Mm-hmm. So why is engagement and retention not all there is in culture?
So I'll try to maybe use a metaphor, but engagement and retention are indicators of culture. Awesome. They are not culture themselves. So when we look at engagement and retention, they are indicating how well people are interacting with the work that they do and how well they're interacting with the culture. So sometimes we create a culture that is actually difficult to engage with. This is person, environment, fit theory, right? There are people who could thrive in one culture that would, maybe die in another culture that would be good for another person. So engagement and retention isn't always an indicator that your culture is good or bad. It is sometimes an indicator of a mismatch. Now, sometimes we've been accidental. We've allowed toxicity to creep into our systems and culture. And so it is actually killing people. Yeah. The atmosphere isn't good for the plants.
Yeah.
But in and of itself, culture exists, and then engagement and retention are feedback loops to say, how well are we matching people to our culture? Mm. How well are we developing them when they're here? How well are we onboarding them to our culture and to the work that they're doing? So I think they matter. We need to work on them. A lot of times, leader development is a key way that you improve engagement. But leader development isn't in itself culture. It's an aspect of how well our leaders are helping people engage with the culture.
I think you bring up a really interesting point, and many leaders out there are striving for perfection, perhaps by nature or just the norm that we've created, that leaders are this perfect person. But what do you do about the people that are not fitting into what for the majority is a good culture, is a healthy culture, that it's a high-performing culture? You've got some outliers who think it's the worst culture ever. What do you do about that?
It's interesting. I do think that we can strive for perfection and say, okay, we've got to get 100% of people on board. I think if that is your mindset, you might be building a cult instead of a culture. So I think we have to, on some level, allow for a measure. And I don't know exactly what that measure is. A lot of people use an 80-20 rule, 80% of people feeling really bought in, engaged with the culture, really healthy, 20% not. That would be above the average culture marker, or engagement marker. For the most part, companies are not at an 80-20 balance. So I think if you got there, you would be a lot healthier than you are right now. So I don't know if 100-0 is the right goal. Yeah. So I think we have to allow for people to opt in and opt out. I think the maybe line of demarcation for me is someone acting against the culture. Is someone actively trying to tear things down, and how's that impacting the team? So how am I allowing for some, ultimately I want conflict. I actually need that in order to drive healthy culture. I need there to be a variety of opinions. I need there to be a diversity of voices in order for people to be, and for our culture to be as healthy as it can be. Leaders can't see everything. So we have to have that space. We talked about psychological safety last year in our learning series. We have to have that space where people can surface disagreement. They can, debate on topics. They can have healthy conflict around ideas. But I think when it comes into people who are actively bad-mouthing the organization, or they are actively, harming other people. And I use harming with those bunny ears too, because I think we're really touchy about intellectual harm at this point. I think then we have to start asking better questions. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule other than people not living up or actively tearing down the organizational values, or people creating immoral activity in the organization. I think those are clear-cut lines. But just having a bad attitude, I don't know if that is a good enough reason to say that a person doesn't fit. I think we've got to ask better questions. We've got to give them an opportunity. We've got to invite them along. And we want to create a compelling enough culture that the culture itself invites people to be healthier. I know when I'm around my friends who are like super active and super healthy and they've got really good habits, I'm like, ooh, I want to be more like that. I think we want to have our culture have that pull towards health, but not the requirement that you absolutely have to conform, because again, that's a lot more like a cult than like a culture.
Yeah, that's great. So not actively having to conform, but really wanting to instead, because it's an attractive environment.
Yeah,
that's great. And it reminds me of like the walls of self-preservation when we teach the influence model. And with that tool, I think a lot, is it me or is it you? Because there are some journeys that people need to take solo outside of the organization.
That's right.
And that's okay. And I really like what you say about the 80-20. So excellence can look like 80% of your team having a good time, producing good work, enjoying the environment. That's excellence.
Yeah.
It's not 100-0.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I think because we're all going to have bad days too. So I think that if we hold ourselves to a standard of 100-0, now I want to have no bad days. I'm going to hold myself to that, but I also need to increase grace and allow myself to have some bad days. But when that bad day becomes a trend of a bad week, a bad month, a bad life, then I really need to be having some much harder conversations. And I think the one thing that I'll say about that 80-20 is the standard for leaders is higher than the standard for individual team members, individual contributors. And I think we need to be very thoughtful in our organizations of who we elevate into positions of leadership, because that is a form of celebration. That is a form of endorsement. And so as we put people into our organizations, the standard for people in a leadership role needs to be higher for how they live out our values. How healthy are they? What's it like on the other side of our leaders? Because that actually has, to a larger degree, a big effect in the organization.
Oh, yeah, the ripple effect. That's great. Okay, so how does our 2025 series connect with the broader work that we do at Solomon around leadership development and organizational flourishing?
Absolutely. So our vision, as you know, Sophie, is workplaces where people can flourish, right? This is the world as it should be, is how we would talk about it. And, again, it's not perfection, but it is, what does healthy look like? And how do we create organizations where people can flourish? I fundamentally believe that we spend too much time at work to be miserable. And while it's not 100% an organization's job to make sure that people aren't miserable, it is our job to make sure we're not demotivating them.
Yeah.
Make sure that we're creating opportunities for them to flourish in the workplace with meaningful work, clarity in their roles. And so what we've tried to do alongside this culture conversation is we broke it up into 3 pieces. We've started out with motivation, and how culture is atmosphere, and how we have to really tend to the 2-factor theory. So the things that motivate people and the things that demotivate people are actually two different things.
Yeah.
It's akin to like pulling out the weeds and planting the flowers.
Yeah.
Demotivators are, let's pull out the things that, are causing harm in the environment, low pay, bad bosses, toxic interpersonal relationships, allowing, things to go on that break policy. That's all demotivating. And then motivating, meaningful work, stretch opportunities, opportunity to grow in a career path, right? Those are things that actually will motivate people. So we started with human motivation. How does it work? And how do we create a culture where we're developing the motivators and we're paying attention to the demotivators? The second conversation piece that we had was really about trust and how does it work? What is trust? What is not trust, I guess is a way to say it. And then this last piece of the conversation is going to be about that gap. So the difference between what we say about ourselves as a culture and what we do.
Yeah.
And so obviously breaking it into 3 parts, we could probably keep this conversation going into the next year or 2, because there is a lot to organizational culture. But what we're trying to do is help people understand you have a responsibility to lead a healthy culture. There are things that you can do. Very smart people have been studying this a very long time, and we're here to guide you. So that's really the work that we do. Is we're really strategic partners to organizations to help them develop healthy culture over time, to pull out those weeds and to tend the flowers that live in the garden of their organization.
Yeah, I love using the flowers analogy because I think everybody has some plants in their house that are flourishing and others that are not. And the trick is, what window do they need? What specific light and nutrients? And that's what we're talking about here with cultures. Each human deserves to be individual, but how do we create parameters that organizations can operate within where flourishing is a thing? Not just the peace lily, but the lemon tree as well, which, that's kind of like a personal thing for me because I've never been able to flourish a lemon tree. I'm still working on it.
Well, I applaud you. And the thing that I would parallel, like you're working at it. And I think that that's the thing that we're trying to help organizations do is work at it. Work at it on purpose. Work at it. Even if you have a healthy culture, do you understand why it's working?
Right, that's good.
Because it could be that it's working right now because you're awesome. And that in itself is a future liability to the organization. So why is it working? What are the things that you're doing that we need to replicate in the organization? Because after a certain size, it can't just be an entirely organic effort. And if you're trying to grow, if you're trying to scale your organization, you want to scale your culture in a way that it drives that strategy forward. And at a point, your culture could be a lid instead of an accelerant.
That's good. Okay. And I think for me, a last point could be, because what I pulled out of that was expectation management. Culture isn't something that you're going to gain and then it never goes away. It's evolving constantly because, like you said, people move in and out of organizations and they have an impact. It ripples out into the culture and how we actually live our everyday. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how can we as leaders manage our expectations so that when we're working on culture, we're not devastated when all of a sudden it doesn't feel the same?
Oh, that's so good. I work with a good friend, and he used to be the CEO of an organization for, a couple of decades. And he said, as I think back on my organization, he said, we had people who were there a super, super long time. People wanted to be there. Our engagement scores, our workplace scores were super high, like a really healthy culture. And he goes, as I think back on it, there was probably only a 30 or 60-day period where I thought it's exactly how it needs to be. Mm-hmm. 25 years.
Yeah.
And it's exactly how it needs to be was like 30 or 60 days. And I think that we have to teach ourselves to enjoy the work.
Yeah.
Enjoy the journey, enjoy the tending of the garden. If the only thing that we enjoy is the day the flower blooms, then it's going to be a lot of toil and not very much joy.
Yeah.
But if we can learn to love the process of doing the work, love the process of developing people, love the process of spotting and celebrating when our values are on display and in full bloom, love the process, not be without sadness or disappointment, but love the process of, okay, that was a miss. That's an opportunity, not something to beat ourselves up about. Mm. So I think, a lot about mindset. One of the most important books I've read, I think, in my life was, Carol Dweck's Mindset and the difference between the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. It's good or bad. That's the fixed mindset. It's good or bad. Culture is right or wrong. It's going how I want it to or not. Growth mindset is it's not there yet. Mm. We have opportunity. We have ways that we can work and move forward. So there's always, even in the most, dire of circumstances, with a growth mindset, there's a way to look at it and go, I bet we can move on that. Mm. I bet we can learn from that thing that really did not go how we wanted to. In fact, that's how the learning series came about. We actually started the learning series. We started it so that we could sell to a specific program. We're like, okay, let's do this. And maybe we'll get people and they'll enroll in this program that we're going to do. And we totally failed at program enrollments. But we thrived at putting on an event together. And it was good for our team. It was good for the community. It was fun. It stretched our minds. We made new friends, new relationships in the in the broader Oklahoma City area. And we're like, you know what? Failure at that, but total win at that. Yeah. And that's a growth mindset, right? Like, what's the opportunity here that we actually have to get better, to grow? And, I will borrow a page from Carol Dweck. And a lot of times when I'm like, golly, that is terrible. Mm-hmm. Or man, I don't like how that's going. If I'll just say yet at the end, it's the ellipsis on a sentence. We haven't figured it out yet, but we did gain a lot by going through that cycle of, we learned a lot there, and not a lot that we can take away from it, but we do know 100 ways that don't work now.
That's great. So what can people expect from the Solomon Learning Series in the future? We're wrapping up the culture conversation, but what comes next?
I think what we try to do really well is we try to be visionary, right? We try to look at the trends of what's going on in the American workforce particularly, and we try to offer answers to questions leaders are asking. So I think what we can promise you, I don't know what we will do for 2026, but what we can promise you is we are looking at leadership pain. We are looking at the spaces where leaders are scratching their heads and going, we don't know, but this is a pervasive problem.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to break that down in a way that is actionable, that's research-based. So it's not just like, here's what we think, but is research-based and provides a framework for action.
Incredible. Thank you so much for your time today. Do you have any last words for our audience?
Just, I hope that they are getting value from listening, and we're totally open. If you have a question you would want us to tackle, that would be super helpful to us. What are you asking about? What are you wondering about? We would love to be a resource to you.